Warning, the podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast, The Murder of Megan Liebengood, Part 1 of 4. Hello, I am Wendy.
And I'm David.
Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast.
Well, I'll tell you what, Wendy, why don't you jump in and tell the listeners what they're about to hear in this 4-part mini-series?
This mini-series on the murder of Megan Liebengood was fascinating. It was tragic. It was horrific. And I guess, David, you could just say it was just downright sad.
Yeah, and you know, the other words that come to me are demonic and evil, and people will hear why. It's really when we get past the case itself, just the people involved were awful, completely awful.
They were, and it was a senseless murder. This was an 18-year-old newlywed. She had been married just barely over 3 months and was murdered in the parking lot of her apartment complex by 3 suspects that she had no idea who they were.
Yeah, and what's good about this, too, is that we have some familiar voices again. Who's the 2 detectives that came and conducted the interview with us?
We have with us Detective Chris Schoonover and Rob Wilson, 2 very seasoned law enforcement officers, detectives, retirees, what have you. And they really just detail this case out from the beginning all the way until they got confessions out of these people. And they weren't easily obtained confessions, but nonetheless, they did get them.
Yeah, what the listener's going to hear is a fast-paced but highly detailed investigation that identified and charged 4 Lexington Kentucky juveniles. And they're going to talk a lot about the challenges of that in the juvenile justice system and when you work with a juvenile on how that happens. But the big thing, too, is like we always hope for and we tend to get, is the listener's going to join a very personal conversation with these 2 detectives, with Schoon and Rob Wilson. They're not only going to detail how the case came together, but you're going to hear a lot about the emotional impact of dealing with callous and evil suspects.
Well, with that, let's dig in and get to part 1 of 4.
Sounds good.
Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast. Today, we are going to be discussing the September 15, 2004 murder of Megan Liebengood. And we have with us today Mr. Rob Wilson. Rob, how are you?
Doing well, Wendy. How are you?
I am great. And Chris Schoonover. Chris, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you for coming back again. And David?
Doing great. I'm glad to be sitting at the table with everybody here today to talk about this case.
Well, I am as well. Rob, why don't you tell our listeners, you've been with us before, tell us a little bit about what you do now and what case you covered with us before in case no one has heard you.
Sure. I've been on the department now for 23 years. Close to 20 years of that has been in the homicide unit. Here over the last year and a half, 2 years, I've been in the cold case unit working old homicides and sexual assaults and rapes. I was here probably a month or so ago, and we did the Alex Johnson case. So that was always an interesting case to discuss, and enjoyed talking about it with you guys.
Well, we enjoyed having you, and you're right, that was a really interesting case. Chris, you covered that as well. You and Rob were kind of sidekicks together during that particular case. But tell our listeners who may have not heard you on our prior podcast what you have done with us before and what you're doing now outside of podcasting for us.
Sure. I started out in the military way back when Moses was riding a chariot. And then I got hired by the police department in 1996, worked a street and patrol for 13 weeks and went up to homicide. Stayed in homicide for close to 20 years like Rob, worked cold cases as well. Towards the end of my career, I became a licensed polygraph examiner. So I did a few years as a licensed polygraph examiner, and now I'm retired and enjoying things.
Okay, guys, so why don't you tell us a little bit about this victim, Megan Liebengood. Tell us, just tell us a little bit about her.
Sure. She was your average 18-year-old girl, but to paint a picture of her, she's about 5'3", 5'2", 5'3", weighs about 110 pounds, long brown hair, just beautiful complexion, a beautiful girl.
She really was beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And the reason I think Dave asked Rob and I to come on is at one point for one of your shows, you wanted us to talk about a case that really affected us. And I know Haley McCone was a big case, but I think after investigating this with Rob, this was my case where it bothered me tremendously, where later on into the podcast, you'll hear about the interviews of the suspects. And that affected me. And that's what I remember about this case most. So she's a young 18-year-old girl, just got married, been married for 3.5 months from Eastern Kentucky. Her mother lived in Richmond, Kentucky, and she had just gotten back from a family funeral in Eastern Kentucky that night. She was doing classes online, if I remember. Her husband was working, doing regular labor as any other 18-year-old guy, playing video games all the time, wearing sweatshirts. And they were trying to make a go of it, being married so young. And that's the way they lived their lives. As far as we could do, the background on Megan and her family was solid. Her sister, I remember her to this day. Her sister was really a solid person, and her mother was solid, good, strong family.
So you all get this call, as you said. She had just come home from a funeral. So tell us what happened. What did the call just go out that there was a murder? Were you all on call that evening, or how did this happen?
Well, after the funeral, she'd gone to the grocery store, and she'd come back home to her apartment complex over near Woodhill Drive. And as the investigation showed, she was in the process of emptying out the groceries from the trunk to take them into her apartment when she was approached by the suspects. Neighbors in the area heard shots and immediately called 911. That goes directly to the patrol officers. They responded to the scene. At that point, she was declared dead at the scene. And at that point, patrol contacts robbery homicide to come out and take over the investigation.
What time of the day or night was this, and was it day or night?
I believe it was around 10:30 in the evening.
Yes. We get called the police officers, and I can give you a little background on the area where this homicide happened. New Circle, it's off of Codell Avenue in Woodhill. The apartment complex is perimetered by New Circle Road, and there's a grassy area. As you see today in September, if anybody, all the listeners are from Kentucky, and those who are not in Kentucky, along the highways, they're mowed maybe 3 times a year. And just wild weeds grow up in between the highway and the buildings. And New Circle Road went around this apartment building, and the weeds were grown. So you could see the apartment buildings and the parking lot from New Circle Road, which is a busy thoroughfare here in Lexington. It was dark, and it wasn't a well-lit parking lot. And she lived in an apartment that was kind of in the corner, but closest to New Circle Road.
Now, Rob mentioned that there were suspects. How many were there? Or did you even know at that time? Had the call gone out that there were multiple?
Yeah, that's what's great about this. The first caller was a male, and he called and said he saw or heard shots and saw 3 white males running by his window.
So you get there, and Megan is deceased, lying there in the parking lot. What else do you see on that scene when you arrive?
As usual, by the time robbery homicide arrives on the scene, there's caution tape placed up to create a perimeter for our investigation. So there's caution tape, there's several patrol cars. Forensic Services Unit had already arrived and had placed lights up so we could see what was going on. And we did our neighborhood canvass. A lot of apartment lights were on, and we got a briefing from the patrol officer that first responded, which is what you want to do. Kind of like you see on TV. The detectives got to start somewhere, and the patrol officer that first responded is the place to go.
What is usually patrol's responsibility at a scene like that before you get there? What are the things you expect?
Just as Chris mentioned, just to do an initial neighborhood canvass, get some statements from neighbors, document that in their reports and memos, but more importantly, at that point, relay all the information to us. Because Officer A may get this information, Officer B may get this information, and they don't know each other's story. So we really like to get to the scene after a while and hear everybody's information. And from that, we'll piece together an avenue of which we need to go down to investigate the case.
And none of that's routine then, right? I mean, people would look at that sometimes and consider it, but I would have to assume from my experience there too, that if things don't happen right in that initial stage, that can impact things later, correct?
Absolutely.
Very serious stuff for a patrol officer.
And nowadays, there's some scenes that turn into homicides where the victim's been removed from the crime scene. So you're already losing some evidence there.
Right. I guess you can't get the totality of what that crime scene looked like with the victim there. You're just left to kind of piece together with what you got. Mm-hmm. Now, you all mentioned that she had just come home from the store. So was she in the midst of unpacking or going in and out of the apartment to the car? Or what did you conclude at that point that she must have been doing?
Right. So when we get there, we have to evaluate everything. First place we want to go is directly to the body. We're very careful not to disturb anything. And we discover that she does have gunshot wounds. And at that point, we look at the car, right? Because that's the most obvious thing where she's near. And what we see is her trunk is completely empty. It's open, completely empty. All 4 doors on the car are shut. The driver's side window is partially down. The items that were in the back of the trunk are just thrown and dispersed in just a mess. There's no rhyme or reason to the bags. There's some things in the bags, some things out of the bags. There's personal items that are laying in the parking lot from a distance from the trunk. So you don't want to assume anything, like we always say, of what happened so early on. But we know something's wrong with that trunk if it's empty. So common sense, we'll talk about common sense and what Rob and I concluded probably that night after walking along looking for evidence.
Okay, so you get there and you find Miss Megan there, and she's, as you said, is deceased from gunshot wound. So did you just go around looking to see where she may have lived, or had the spouse come out at that point when he saw police presence?
Well, it was great because our lieutenant lived close to that area. So he responded, actually beat Rob and I there. And the 3 of us got together. And of course, you want to use all of the resources you have. So he decided maybe since this was such a large crime scene, it's an apartment building. You probably have, Rob, would you say probably 300, 400 people on the apartment complex that need at least to be a knock and talk with. So he calls in 2 other detectives, Brother Tenant and Detective Kane, and they're going to start the neighborhood canvass. So we did that, and along with talking to her husband, we had to locate her husband. We knew he was one of the callers because on one of the calls, the male voice said that we've been married, and I heard gunshots, and she's laying in the parking lot.
So he already knew. You all didn't have to inform him that his wife had been just shot. He heard it as she was coming inside.
That's correct. Obviously, he was one of the first people that Chris and I wanted to speak with. And those are such horrible interviews. I mean, he actually came outside and saw his wife laying on the ground with bullet holes in her head. And then, 20 minutes later, Chris and I are questioning him about things. And it's not pleasant, but you have to look at all angles. And we were asking him difficult questions. And, even I wouldn't think he was a suspect, but we knew we had to cross that bridge. If you just start looking at random people in the neighborhood or whatever, a defense attorney would say, you completely neglected to look at the husband. So we have to get over that. Interviewed him, asked if he had a gun. He stated that he did, provided the firearm to us. We took that into custody. On down the road, the calibers didn't match with the shell casings that we found at the scene. So he was very quickly excluded as being involved, but you have to do that. It's part of your investigation.
Well, as part of that broadness that you're talking about, let me step back a little bit so the listeners get a feel for this. You use the word neighborhood canvass. What is that, and what are the goals, and how is that conducted? What value does that have to an investigation?
So we like to think in our business that there's always a busybody in the neighborhood. So the odds of finding that busybody, like an older lady, a cat lady, you may say, I hope I don't offend any listeners, but you have that cat lady who doesn't do anything all day. She's watching out the window. Oh, the mail gets delivered every time this day, or that car is not from this neighborhood. So that's what you're hoping you'll find. And so if you knock on 300 doors, hopefully the odds are 10 of the people out of the 300 may have heard or saw something. So we've got to knock on every one of those doors because it's going to be set in their mind early on. As time goes by, they're going to think, well, maybe that wasn't that important that night that I heard that, or that I saw that, or that I heard these voices of kids, right? At that time, they would remember it. But later on, they might think, no one came and asked me any questions. There's probably not that important.
So was that successful? Did you and Rob do that evening, or did other people canvass to take statements of what people may have heard or seen?
Everybody was involved. The patrol officers at the scene, and as Chris mentioned, Detective Brotherton, Detective Kane were also there. And Chris and I certainly did our part of knocking on doors.
Well, it's also true, because I've seen it before too, when you're doing that canvas, is that you may knock on the door of a suspect, which is handy, because what you're doing there is you're actually putting them in an area, even if you don't know they're involved yet. Now you've got a record that at 11:43 p.m. that I knocked on 204, and this person identified himself. So I just wanted people to hear how important that is when they see that happening. It's foundational to a case.
Yeah, and to add a case that you and I worked, Dave, that we've learned by the time this canvas happened, that if you knock on a door and there's people sitting in the living room, you ask the person who answered the door, hey, is everybody a resident here? Or are they here visiting? Because you know what? It could be your suspect sitting there. They just happen to know that person, so they ran up to the apartment after the shooting. So we want to make sure you cover that, because in the long run, if this goes to trial, it's going to show that you're really inept at your job if you didn't recognize that.
Oh, certainly. And did you all gain any more knowledge that evening aside of 3 males?
We weren't really even certain of that. Just because somebody saw 3 male subjects running, they could have been smoking cigarettes behind a building, heard gunshots, and got scared and ran. Doesn't mean that they're involved in a killing. So you have to take that information with a grain of salt. And doing the neighborhood canvas, you very rarely get this magnificent witness who was looking out their window and saw the entire thing. You're hoping to get a little piece from this witness, a little piece from that, and you can really start to tie it together. We didn't really get a lot that night. The one important thing that we did learn was, after forensic services processed the scene, as Chris mentioned, groceries were scattered around, her purse was scattered around. We believe that certain personal items for Miss Liebengood were missing, like car keys and such.
So after we did the canvas, like Rob said, we're not going home. We still have things to do. What we did is we walked the area, the apartment complex of where the individuals were seen running. And then you carry it out even further, right? Because that's a direction, but we don't know if we miss anything. So we actually walked over probably a half mile on the other side of the apartment complex and found a unopened pack of cigarettes that looked like they had just been purchased.
So what do you do with the cigarettes?
We collected it. You don't know what's important until on down the road. But as we spent several hours that night, but it became quickly apparent that we'd knocked on every door. The scene had been processed. And it's one of those bad feelings when you kind of hit a dead end on the initial call out. You want to keep going. Chris and I have worked cases where we didn't sleep for 48 hours because there was an obvious next step to the investigation. At that point, we just kind of looked at each other and was like, there's nothing else to do right now.
I do. That's a terrible feeling as a detective. Like, I know I'm missing something. I should have something else to do. Yeah, I recall that feeling. And we even went to our lieutenant, and he was trying to brief the administration and make sure they were up to date on the homicide. And I remember maybe we should ask him if we missed something or the next step. And we had a little round table and there was nothing else to do. We didn't get
because
any leads.
Where do you go when that's it? You've got a pack of cigarettes, a dead female, groceries scattered everywhere, and possibly 3 witnesses or possibly 3 suspects, but you can't even be sure of that. So where do you even go if you've canvassed and nobody sees anything, nobody knows anything?
Well, you always like to see the scene in daylight. So we made the determination to go home and get some rest, meet early the next morning. And Chris had the good idea with such a large scene, getting one of the recruit classes in the academy to maybe get them come out and, get in a battle line and just start walking the air to look for anything that we missed during the evening. So we had that happen. And then a really interesting, really the thing that broke the case, Chris came across somebody that he knew from way back in the day that Chris had treated very well in the past, and that paid off big time in this case.
Chris, how did it pay off? And tell us what you can about this person.
Right, sure. Let me explain to the listeners that at the same time that Rob and I are having the recruits walk around the apartment complex, and which Codell leads into Woodhill, Megan's body gets taken to the medical state examiner's office and an autopsy gets performed. So that's going on while we're doing this walk through this search grid. So we're getting calls from the forensic services unit because somebody has to be present from the police department to collect the evidence up there and to determine what's going on as far as prints, as far as any kind of ballistics. And they're sending us photos of what they see. So that's a great thing about technology today, even though I barely learned how to text but 2 weeks ago. So
I still remember the old days when a Polaroid camera was what it was.
Yeah.
And you also did that to keep, and people need to know that this is just a cultural thing that went on to keep people out of the scene. Is a lot of times we'd shoot those Polaroids just to satisfy curiosity of command and stuff like that, because it was a lot easier to show them a Polaroid instead of them having to traipse through under that tape and whatnot. Those are the internal things that we all dealt with.
Right.
Now,
right.
Did either of you two go to the autopsy?
No, because Rob and I were in charge of trying to get the recruits and doing the search, because like Rob said, things look totally different in the daylight than they do at night. And we already knew some of the things that were missing from Megan's car. So as we did our canvas, as we did our search with the recruits, we end up over at an apartment complex right on the corner of Codell and Woodhill. And in that apartment complex is where Rob was talking about finding that nice lady who I encountered several years ago. And it's a lesson, and if any young officers are listening, discretion can be used in great ways. You don't have to arrest everybody. And I remember when I was on patrol and doing homicide, there's several people that we would talk to, prostitutes, people caught with drugs. You don't have to arrest all those people. I'm not saying to do anything illegal, but there's ways you can book evidence in, found property, things like that.
You can cite people as opposed to taking them to jail.
Yeah.
So the thing is to try to build some kind of rapport with them, correct?
Right. And this woman saw Rob and I walking with these recruits, and she waved Rob and I over, and we ended up talking, and she reminded me who she was, and she says, I have a daughter, and you kept me out of trouble and want to keep her out of trouble. We would like to talk to you, but we can't because of the culture. I don't want her being seen or me being seen talking to the police. But last night, a friend of hers that she identified by name, she saw dropping things in, climbed into the dumpster and dropped things in there. So Rob hears this, and I'm continuing to talk to the woman, and this is how we've worked together so well all these years. He actually goes to look for the dumpster. The dumpster's empty. He has already read the sticker on the side of the dumpster, called that number for whoever picks up that trash, and calls their dispatch and has our patrol officers find the truck and pull the trash truck over.
Yeah, it had just been picked up probably 5 a.m., 6 a.m., and Chris and I were back out there at 7, 8 a.m. So he's continuing on with this cooperating individual. So, yeah, telepathy works. Chris is telling me, go check the dumpster, get what information
you all are like an old married couple, aren't you?
We've been accused of that, yes.
He does snore a lot.
just when you spoon.
Yes.
Well, and the great thing is you all read each other's minds, so you weren't like, where are you going? You knew he must have had something he was going to do, and you didn't stop that interview to question.
I trust he knows the next step. We've worked so long. I knew where he was going to go.
And it was, we talked about their peaks and valleys in every investigation. That was a peak.
And relationship.
That was a peak. Oh, God, we've got a probable suspect jumping in a dumpster at, right after the shooting. I go out there, dumpster's empty. So we're right back at a valley. So, and worst case scenario, this dump truck has already made it to the dump, and then we're looking at a huge mess of trying to locate stuff. Luckily, we were able to stop the truck about a mile from the transfer station. So once Chris concluded his interview, we had other detectives meet us out Old Frankfort Pike, where the transfer station was, emptied that dump truck into a secured facility, and we all got on our little white suits and booties and started sifting through the trash.
It's glamorous. I got excited hearing about it, but I'm joking because I've done the same thing. I think we all have.
Yeah.
Every one of us has dived into a dumpster in the early morning hours. I used to carry as odd as it sounds, I carried one of those automotive work lights with an inverter and a Tyvek suit, because eventually it was going to be your turn to go sift through a big dumpster of trash. And I remember with Craig Sorrell going out to the landfill one time to catch a truck that had picked up garbage on a rental car that was recovered from down in New Orleans. It was a bizarre thing. And you go out there with rakes and shovels and put on your little fancy outfit. So for everybody that thinks this business is all glamour, that's an eye-opening experience for you.
Yeah, it really is. And before we move on from Chris talking about this individual that helped him, what he did years before this crime paid off big time. And as he mentioned, if there's any young officers out there listening, I get asked the same things, like, how do you develop your CIs, which is confidential informants? And a lot of people have this conception that you arrest a guy, you force him to flip. That works once because he's working to get his charge dropped. The way you do it is what I tell these young officers, like, you treat people with respect and decency. I had an individual that I had pulled over on patrol, a traffic stop. I could smell marijuana in the car. And she had mentioned, like, yes, there's some marijuana in the car. She showed me how much. And she started crying. She's like, I'm on my way to my job. If I don't make my job, I'm going to get fired. If I get fired, I can't make next month's rent. If I don't have a place to live, the city's going to take my children away from me. And I could tell she was really sincere. So I wrote her a ticket. And because, I observed the illegal narcotics, I couldn't just let her go. But she was so appreciative. That individual's probably helped me solve 3 or 4 murders over my career, has never asked for a cent. She was just, you treated me well when I didn't think anybody was going to that day. And so it's just building relationships with people. Treat people with decency and respect, and it'll come back your way. So just, any young officers out there, that's the way to do it. Treat people with decency and respect.
Yeah, quit doing that BS they see in movies and TVs. Yeah, I'm serious. It's all about that. And without going on and launching a complete platform on this, but, with everything going on, this is 2021, and there's obviously a lot of turmoil in the country. But I'm going to tell you, I've said for a long time, I think what most people in this country want is us just to do it better and communicate and quit being in a glass and a vacuum and be approachable. Because I'm the same way with you, is just stopping and talking to somebody paid dividends to this day. I remember I met a juror after a trial, years after a trial, in a restaurant, and she walked up and told me who she was. I didn't know her from Adam. And you know what she focused on, Rob, was just like you're saying. She goes, I could not believe that y'all had the relationships you did with those prostitutes. And at first I'm like, well, wait a minute, let's clarify what.
Right.
But you know what she was saying is, even as a juror in the community, is she saw what you're talking about. And we talked about it. And I said, yeah, it's because these are people. Yeah. And it's not like you're using them or wringing them out or anything like that. The idea is that you hit it so perfectly because everybody else treats them awful.
Yeah. And it's really, Chris was such a good person back in the day. That's why this case got solved. Because like I say, that evidence, if we'd missed it by another 20 minutes, it would have been in the city landfill, and we're not going to find the evidence we need in the landfill. So, it's really a credit to Chris and how he treats people that this case got solved.
I hope people are listening.
Yeah, not anymore. I'm not that nice, but...
Well, let me ask you, with the lady, when she came out, did you recognize her from back when, or did it take her telling you who she was to recognize her?
As soon as we forgot each other's name, but we started hugging. We gave each other, oh, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? And, today, especially in today's current events, it's funny, back in 2004, they still wanted their community to be safe. That's why she goes out and does what she did. She didn't do it because I helped her. She felt comfortable because she knew she could trust me, and I would not ever give up her or her daughter. But she knew that she could trust me, and she wanted that community better. And she knew the person that was in that dumpster was not a good person.
We need so much more of that right now. We need tons of that right now.
We love DNA and forensics and all that, but I will take community cooperation any day over science.
And I think that's what we're lacking the most of. But I still think it's in the power of the people out there working. Because let's say we all know, too, we've met somebody who had a run-in with somebody we worked with that was non grata. And we know that exists, and it frustrates you because you've got to get over that trust with them, too. But just as much as you can do good, you can screw this up pretty bad, too.
Very quickly.
So you speak with the lady. She gives you her information. You then, I guess, contact Rob and say, let's get back together, or where are you?
Well, the dumpster was right behind, actually, her apartment. So as soon as her and I real quick, I went into the alcove where no one could see us talking. We made real quick arrangements to meet later that evening, where to meet, and what we're going to talk about. As soon as we got that, she went right back into her apartment. I walk back to check the dumpster because I knew Rob was back there. And Rob had already filled me in as soon as I walked up. He goes, yep, got it pulled over. We're going to go ahead and get with patrol, and they're going to escort it to the transfer station. So about the Tyvek suit, we decide that we did discover a few things, by the way, on that search grid. We discovered a bloody T-shirt, bloody shorts, and that was it. So do we know if it's connected to the homicide? No, but are we going to collect it? Absolutely. So at that time, we decided go ahead and dismiss the recruits. We're going to have to go to the transfer station because be a leader, do as I do, not as I say kind of thing. So I knew, let's talk about those Tyvek suits. I'm not wearing those into any nightclub and trying to pick up a woman. You look like a walking balloon.
Well, I was going to say, for people that don't know what we're talking about, think Oompa Loompas and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate
Absolutely.
Factory. And you're
That's
there.
exactly what they are.
Just different colored skin.
Yeah. And so we are, I mean, trash is just smelly. And they don't show this on TV, or I probably wouldn't have applied for the police department. We dumped the whole truck, and we're in there, and you can't just look at a bag and shake, oh, there's nothing in it. You can't do that. You have to open every single bag, every single box, half-chewed food.
Baby diapers. That's the worst.
Human toilet paper. I mean, it's like, what other toilet paper is there other than human? But adult toilet paper.
It could be kids too. It's toilet paper and it's gross.
It's just bad. Week-long food.
And diapers, they tend to ripen.
Yeah.
It's, you never get over the smell. I mean, everybody gagged at least a couple of times it was out there. It's just, you can have your mask on or whatever, and of course it's September, it's hot. You know, it was just not a pleasant day, but you put all that in the back of your mind and know you're going to laugh about it later, but a job's got to be done and nobody else is going to do it. You know, it's your case. You take ownership of it. And I would never, and Chris was a great detective. He was in there too. It would have been easy to, it's like, hey, you young guys in the unit, put your stuff on and go in there. No, it was his case. There's no way Chris wasn't going in there.
Well, I wasn't going to, except for OSHA required us to wear orange hard hats. And I thought I looked sexy. I did. So I put those on while we were searching for
It tends to enhance your swimmer's build, or at least that's what I read on Craigslist. So
right.
You're in good shape.
I used to be on Craigslist. I've transferred media.
So are we talking about, for our listeners, how much trash are we talking? Like could fill a front yard, could fill a living room?
A driveway. It could fill a complete driveway. It was a full trash truck.
Yeah, full driveway about 2 feet deep.
Oh, wow.
So
you're sifting through every piece. And you don't even know do you know what you're looking for, kind of? Or you don't even know what you're looking for?
We started with the keys in her purse. And then we have any kind of credit cards, any kind of license, anything that we can tie Megan to this dumpster, right? Because if we can tie that to the dumpster, then my friendly lady who helped us
can tie you back to the person.
Her information is going to be really solid.
Well, and you still don't have a gun yet, too. I mean,
no gun yet.
Yeah,
and did you think the keys were going to be used to come back for that car later, or why did we take the keys?
We had no clue.
Yeah, I would say more than likely, and this is just me speculating, they were in a panic and took whatever they thought they might need at that moment or later. Obviously, I'm sure their main concern was cash and cards and stuff like that. Maybe they thought about taking the car. But yeah, we knew that the keys were not in the ignition, not in the door, and not in her purse. So we had a strong suspicion that they had taken those keys for whatever reason.
So just to kind of put a time slot on everything, the murder happened at 10:44 on the 15th. It's now the 16th. We're in the afternoon. The autopsy is going on. It's just completed while we're going through the dumpster, and I get Rob and I share the photos. We get photos of Megan's injuries. What we see are 3 gunshot wounds, 2 to one side of the head and 1 to the other. On the one side of her face and head is tattooing and stippling. To explain what that is it helps with distance from where the shot was fired. So the smaller the tattooing and the stippling, the closer the weapon. This was, I could say, spread from about her eye socket to about her ear, which maybe 2 to 3 feet distance, maybe a little bit more. So at that point, that was probably, we can't say which shot came first, right? Except for when they send us the photo, Forensic Services does, there's a ruler in one of the pictures, and 2 of the shots are about 1.5 inches apart. So unless you're really a sniper in the military, to put 2 into one side of her head 1.5 inches apart, she probably wasn't moving. Are we safe saying that?
Well, another thing too, real quick for the listeners, tattooing and stippling, what causes that?
That comes from the gun. When you fire a gun, gunpowder and flames come out of the barrel of that gun. And if a person's close enough to the barrel, they're going to take that gunpowder and it's going to burn a pattern into the skin of the victim in this case. And then they can estimate the distance from that tattooing.
And on those 2 wounds, and I don't know if you recall or not, was there any presence of skin tearing that might even indicate which one came first? Have you ever seen that before, like in a star pattern or whatever? Did you know that on this?
Yeah, there was no star pattern on this one. For the listener, star pattern would indicate almost a contact shot,
right,
with the muzzle against the head or the body part that was shot. There didn't appear to be that, and I would agree with Chris's assessment with the tattooing and stippling. This is going to be 2 feet away, so I would imagine they were the kill shot went out with the stippling, and then she was down, and they probably put 2 more in her to make sure she was dead. As Chris indicated, the closeness of the 2 bullet wounds, she would have been still, and I would imagine they just walked over her and put 2 more in her to make sure she was dead.
Does that speak to you a little bit too, more about who you're dealing with and motivations and mindsets when you have something like that?
Absolutely. We will need that information later on when Rob and I start doing interviews about their character, what they care about, right? Because that's very important in an interview. What's most important to them? So is human life really important to them? We know that going in, probably not. It's probably themselves that is the most important thing to them.
Yeah, because you get to the point where arguably 1 to somebody's head would be enough, and then to take the time to do 2 more, that's when it speaks a lot to who you're about to deal with.
Well, and it just tells that if it were 1, you could make the argument. And it'd be tough to disprove. It's like, yes, I had a gun, I was pointing at her, and I got scared, and the gun went off. That sometimes happens. We know that, from other homicides we worked. But you sure as heck don't walk over her and put 2 more in her head.
Fantastic point. You're right, because if they don't have that defense when you talk them to, they will in 2 weeks.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It'll get offered, and it'll come up. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So after we determine what the cause of death was and her injuries, what we do is continue through the trash. Now, I'm going to put a little shout out to Detective Sarantonio. He actually got into the trash with us, but we discovered something very, very nice.
Hey, there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, which is our website, and it has show notes for imagery and audio and video files related to the cases you're going to hear. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, and YouTube, which has closed caption available for those that are hearing impaired. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or wherever you download your podcast from. Subscribe to the Murder Police Podcast and set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.